Hello, hello, this is Alex Burkett, and you're listening to the Long Game Podcast. This is a special episode of The Long Game. We are restreaming an interview that I did for the Learning to Change podcast with Melissa Emler, or as I know her, Mrs. Emler, because she was in fact my high school English teacher. We're reposting this because it was one of the best interviews that I've ever been a part of. In many cases, when we do SEO-related podcasts, industry podcasts, the interviewer will ask questions like, do backlinks still matter in 2024? And where should I place my CTAs? This was not a podcast like that. This podcast got to deeper mental models that we apply when we think about AI, which is really just a placeholder or a tangible way to show how we think at Omniscient about learning, about change, about innovation and the trade-offs that come with these tectonic shifts, how we think about all of this stuff within our company and how we're applying it to our clients and our models. So it's a super fun episode, very intellectually rigorous, and it had some of the deepest and the best posed questions that I have experienced in a podcast. So I hope you enjoy this repost from the Learning to Change podcast. What I'm trying to figure out is if artificial intelligence can create a lot of commoditized content and quick answers, and the interfaces that we're using to find those changes, then what's the emerging value of content? Like, why do people seek out information? What's the value in that? And how do I build the agency processes and our services around that value?
Welcome to the Learning to Change podcast, where we explore the power of the modern learner's lens and put the focus on learning. I'm your host, Melissa Emler, and today I talk with Alex Burkett. He's the co-founder of the content marketing agency, Omniscient. This was a special episode because Alex was a student of mine back in the day. And even way back then, I could see his potential as a writer and as a thinker. Alex and his colleagues are in a huge learning phase. Together, we explore how advancements like AI chatbots and generative search are changing how people discover and interact with content online. We discuss whether websites and traffic will still matter as much in the future. I, of course, emphasize the importance of not just access to content, but how content gets used, because how it gets used is truly where the value is created. So sit back, tune in, and join us on this inspiring journey of growth, change, and learning. Without further ado, here is my conversation with Alex Burkett. Welcome to the podcast, Alex Burkett. I am so glad you are joining me on the Learning to Change podcast. It's really exciting because I have been watching your career grow on LinkedIn for a long time, and I'm super impressed by all of the work that you've done. But I'm not surprised by any of it because you were one of my best freshman and sophomore English students that I ever had. So now, I'm not asking you to divulge any stories, but do you remember being a great English student back in the day?
It's funny that you frame it that way. I'm a little shocked to hear that. I feel like I'm a better student now than I was in high school, but I probably showed potential.
You absolutely showed potential. And your writing, so as an English teacher, obviously, there are very few students that stand out that I can say they were great writers then. And you were a great writer then, but I've always thought that it was because you were a great thinker. And you were like, a typical freshman and sophomore when I had you in class. And you were fun and you had a band and you were, a little wild child a little bit, but you were always very thoughtful and you were always a thinker. So when I watched your career growing into what you do now and your company is Be Omniscient, right?
Mm-hmm. Omniscient Digital. Yep.
And so you're a digital content agency, essentially. So as I watched that happen, I was like, oh my God, I could have predicted this trajectory. And so are you surprised at your career path?
Yes and no. I think in high school, I even, realized that I loved literature and reading. I didn't put two and two together that I could make a career in any way related to writing. I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do. I think I wanted to do music, right? And I started college as a music major and quickly realized that because I hadn't been playing piano and doing music theory since age 4, I was a little bit behind, and I was kind of a punk rock guy who liked playing guitar and playing the drums loud. There was some point in college where I started reading authors like Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss, who we use the word creator now, but they just had blogs. They were just writing. This is before podcasts were mainstream. And I kind of fell into that niche a little bit. So that made me start writing a blog. And that was like basically me taking the learnings from school in college, the books I was reading, the advertising classes I was taking, the additional reading that I was doing, and just writing the lessons that I was learning. And it kind of weaved in and out from there to eventually the point I'm at now, which is running a business that is incredibly writing centric. So yeah, there was some twists and turns. I think the inklings were there though.
For sure. Having taught you and then watching your career, it seems like all in perfect alignment. And I'm sure that when you're the one experiencing it, you experience those twists and turns. But what I love so much about the work and the podcast that you do now, The Long Game, definitely check it out. I'm an avid listener. But what I find so awesome about your entire trajectory is that I have always thought of you as being a learner and always extremely curious. And then you take those curiosities and you think about it and you write. And it's your writing where you make sense of what you're learning. And so I have really enjoyed sort of learning from your learning.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. And I love that one of my students is really like, I see you as a learner. Do you see yourself as a learner?
100%. Like that's one of the primary identities I have, for better or for worse, because sometimes it does have cons too. When you get too far down in the rabbit hole and you're reading and learning, and it's like I just got to do something. So sometimes I'll find myself a little bit too buried in the world of ideas. But to your point about like the writing and thinking and learning through writing, one thing that came to mind, and this is back to like the twists and turns of the career. The shocking thing for me was that I dove into the world of statistics and data-driven marketing and kind of mathy marketing. And this was at a company called CXL. Basically, they were a conversion rate optimization agency. And I started at the company. They were heavily built on content marketing. So I was writing 2 articles a week, running experiments and doing, additional marketing to drive leads for the agency. But at that point, I didn't know anything. I knew nothing about A/B testing. I barely knew anything about analytics. And I looked at that. I still look at that as sort of getting paid to learn. It was like graduate school for data-driven marketing, but I was getting paid to write the articles. So during the writing process, that was my way of learning all of those topics. And then I eventually kind of went into that field before I launched the agency. So I definitely resonate with that.
Yeah, well, and I find that so funny because you also have an amazing balance between creator and analyzer, researcher, that analytics, that data side. You have a good combination of that. Do you find that to be an anomaly for your skill set and for your work?
No. So I think that it feels like it should be more common because in college, I was in the journalism school. Basically, I was an advertising and public relations major, but I had to take multiple foundational journalism courses, which a lot of people would consider more on like the creative lines, more on like the humanities. But journalism to me was very similar to being an analyst. It's like crystallizing your questions. What do you want to know? What questions are you asking to get that information? Because that to me, that's what analytics is too. It's not just looking at reports and data and numbers. It's saying like, what looks weird about this? Or like, where are we trying to go? And what information would I ideally need to get there? And where are the gaps? It's all about the questions. So those two, the mindset of those two things feels very similar to me.
Yeah, and it's all about the questions. So it just feeds your curiosity.
Right. And that's why it's so fun to do a podcast too. You're just doing questions all day.
Absolutely. So I love thinking about how you got started, that your creator side sort of taught you about the analytics side and what you needed to do to be successful. But that led you to being, for lack of a better word, an expert in sort of SEO and content optimization, A/B testing, experiments. I know one of the roles that you had at a company recently, you were like, weren't you the experimenter? Like, wasn't that your title?
I don't remember what my title was. Yeah. I ran the experimentation program and the team at Workato, which is like this enterprise automation platform, kind of like Zapier it's like Zapier with SOC 2 compliance.
So, I mean, I think about all of those, that layer of expertise that you're obviously bringing and utilizing in your agency. And I think about what's happening in the context of technology and the world in relationship to AI. And I think, oh my goodness, you're about to be disrupted and sent on the next learning journey. So I'm curious to know sort of what you're thinking about or learning about as it relates to AI or SEO in the work and in the agency work that you do.
Yeah, that's a big question. So the thing that I'm learning with AI specifically is that it's like a meta skill almost to learn how to parse out the signal from the noise. Because this is such a trendy topic, there's a lot of bad information out there, or maybe not bad information, but just vapid information that doesn't actually apply. There's a lot of hot takes, right? Like there's all kinds of creators now who are jumping on the bandwagon of AI and trying to build newsletters, trying to build personal brands based on it. So it's trying to find who of the creators, who of the influencers is legit, who has skills to back it up and experiences to back it up. You're not going to find all signal. So like if you want to learn anything, you're going to have to parse through that to a certain extent. With AI, it's clearly something that's going to impact search. It already is with regards to search, generative experience in Google and Bard, Bing Chat. Like it's changing the way consumers are interfacing with information. So that's where I go down to like the root level and think not just how do we create more content with AI. I feel like that sort of solutionism that's applying like a bandage and not really thinking about the problem we're trying to solve with that. What I'm trying to figure out is if artificial intelligence can create a lot of commoditized content and quick answers, and the interfaces that we're using to find those changes, then what's the emerging value of content? Like why do people seek out information? What's the value in that? And how do I build the agency processes and our services around that value, right? Because if there's this layer of information that's going to get picked off and summarized and rehashed in a way that, you can get a 1-second answer, that's probably not going to be the value add that our agency is best suited to serve, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And what's coming up for me when you talk about that is in my work with lots of education departments, state education departments, large school districts, we are often talking about content and knowledge, and we're framing it in regards to access. And we always talk about access plus use equals benefit. So in the case of your agency and creating content initially was about providing access to all of this knowledge that all of these people had. But now that you have not content that can be sort of knocked off and summarized and, just shrunk down into its least common denominator, you have a problem with use. So how are people wanting to use the content that's being created? And it's the usage of the content that creates the benefit. And so I think that's an interesting way to really think about the work of a content agency is when you're thinking about content, how are you intending for people to use the content you're putting out? And have you thought about that much?
That's an interesting question. How are they using the content? Well, so we very specifically in our context, we work with B2B companies. Mm-hmm. So they're going to be writing content for other marketing or sales leaders or IT leaders who are hoping to buy software or services. So there's a certain level of complexity in that content. If I was in a consumer space, I feel like I would have a much different answer here. But there's a certain utility. It's almost like there's a piece of the content itself. It's like who wrote it and like what's the additional information that I'm getting from this piece of content that I can't get on G2 or Capterra or software review sites or your average industry blogger. Like what is novel about this? There's a certain novelty seeking with regards to the information or expertise, right? Like that's a big use case for the content that we're serving and we're writing is like what's the expertise that this person who's writing it has or we have if we're helping the content production engine, and how do we showcase that expertise in a useful way? That's a big component of what we're doing.
Well, and I think that when you're showcasing the expertise, you also highlight the nuance that of what makes this product or that product different than what else is on the market. And I believe that it's the nuances that create the light bulb moments or the aha moments that move people forward in their usage of whatever is being marketed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that part is interesting. And I think that like SEO, you can still benefit from SEO with that type of content even now, right?
I think even more so. This is one of those things with the noise versus signal thing. There's so many changes and there's so much volatility in search engines right now. But there's a couple new features that I find interesting in that way. So history, there's just with these quick answers with generative search, that's already been a little bit of a trend with feature snippets and like the feature snippet boxes. Like when you search what is account-based marketing, it was already summarizing answers from the existing
content. And you wouldn't
content.
even have to go to the page. So there'd be no benefit for the producer of that content, really.
A little, I mean, it's almost like a billboard. Like there is like the domain, there's the URL, so you might see that. But yeah, it's like the value is chipping away already. So this is just a furthering of that trend. But there's other factors of search that are changing. There is, what is it called? I can't remember the name now. But there's basically a feature where you can see all the social feeds and Reddit, Quora, like different perspectives, I believe it's called. So there is this emerging trend of like who's writing the content and what different multimedia takes we can get on the subject. So there's definitely still value in SEO. And there's like, I find it exciting because this is where learning comes in. It's like, I'm trying to figure out where those changes are going, where the dust is going to settle and how we like get in front of those trends and like figure out search in the future.
So if you're a betting man, what's search in the future? Like, what are you aiming for?
Yeah. So at this current standpoint, I think that Google makes a lot of money in ad revenue. So I don't believe they're going to do anything drastic that chips that away. Simultaneously, they have to compete in the world of AI and quick answers and generative answers. So there's going to be a certain proportion of content that isn't going to be as valuable for businesses to create. I think historically that's been true. It was a lot of top of funnel content that wasn't very high intent for buyers. And I think that's largely maybe not going away. Maybe you still want to write that content to have a comprehensive library. But the value is shifting for me to provide specificity, to showcase thought leadership and expertise, even in content that is specifically written for search, to interweave that into the content. And there's a term, it's not a new term, but it's increasingly relevant called information gain. So it's essentially, like, if you think of content in two pieces, there's like table stakes. This is the information that needs to appear in this document in order for an algorithm to deem it as relevant for this search query. And then there's additional information gain that sits on top of that, which is a novel way of explaining it, a new perspective, or some unique piece of expertise that's in the content that differentiates it from the other 9 results on the top search engine page. I think that's where I want to focus, is like, how do we provide information gain? Because then even if SEO dies, it's still valuable that you're creating and mining for new insights that only you can provide. To me, it's like it's hard to fake that level of expertise. So whatever the distribution engine of content is in the future, that's still going to be valuable to showcase those insights.
That happens to be where Modern Learners, which is my company, it's the insights that actually made us a valuable website. My original business partners were prolific writers and speakers, and they theoretically blogged, thought leadership kind of blogs. Like if I read them now, I think we said the same thing many times, many ways. But they were prolific and they resonated with people because they were essentially, it was a new take on an old theme. And those were the pieces that gave our website more authority. But they never knew a thing about SEO. But I think it was that information gain or that insight, the different take on an old subject that actually had the biggest impact on our growth from a traffic perspective. Do you think traffic is still going to matter? Like, how is traffic going to be impacted by AI? Because I think that's what's interesting to me is like, are people still going to go to your website?
That's a hard question. I think traffic as a generality still matters. So like the website, like the question there is the website still going to be relevant? Probably. I've heard takes that it's not going to be as relevant, or websites are dead. I don't think that's necessarily true in my experience. I still think you probably want an owned asset. The website is a good congregation space for all of the distribution work you're doing on social and search. Depending on what happens with those channels, like I think you want that landing page, and then also the email list as a corollary to that. So some kind of owned distribution channel that you can capture information and send timely and relevant content. I don't think the website's going to go away, but it's probably diminishing in prominence. I've noticed that even in B2B. We wrote an article a while back called it was about blogging is losing power, enter decentralized content. And I think the take was a little bit extreme. I've sort of walked back a little bit after seeing how much SEO opportunity there still is in blogging. But in a lot of the brands that we're working with, we're seeing this new play where essentially you've got ideas, you've got messaging, you've got all of the same topics that you would have previously written about in search, and you're incentivizing your leadership and your employees to write about that in their own way and build thought leadership up on the platform, like the social platforms themselves. So I'm seeing a lot more thought leadership and personal brand platforms being built on LinkedIn, previously on Twitter or X now, but I feel like that's, who knows where that stands at this point, or Threads.
It's a grieving day that's going to die. And it's going to, I am grieving the loss of what Twitter once was. That's been a huge change.
Absolutely. I mean, that was a big platform for me early on in my career, back when I was at CXL. I remember the distribution was huge there. But that's the other point that I wanted to make with the website question and traffic is, even though despite like in this moment, people are getting a lot of traction on LinkedIn. It seems like a lot of people are saying like, this is the new modern way. Every social platform has gone through this life cycle where in the early days, it's sort of unoptimized. It's the Wild West, think Threads right now. And then a couple hackers or creators figure out how to game the algorithm. The platform looks into that behavior and starts to incentivize it because they realize that creators are going to spend more time there, attract more users for the platform. The distribution, organic distribution is incredible. And then slowly over time, they pull back and make you pay for that access. And I think we're seeing that with LinkedIn. So that's where I'm like, all right, from a first principle standpoint, this has happened multiple times. It's probably still relevant to have a little bit of real estate that you own on the internet.
Yeah, I absolutely agree that it's relevant, but I'm super curious to know how, as AI develops, how are brands going to show up in the responses from the chat? Brands are going to have a way to sort of appear in the responses that are included at some point. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that shape shifts and where they pull that from.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily how all of this is going to work. Like there's a lot of algorithm understanding to do on my part still. But if we look at just Google's generative search experiments, they have changed it a lot, obviously. But I've seen recent updates where, they're adding links that are clickable links. This is where we found and summarized the content. Jasper, previous client of ours, they've got Jasper Chat, which includes Google search results. So if you ask a question, how do I learn jiu-jitsu? How do I go from white belt to blue belt? It's going to take information from the top page, maybe summarize that, and then give you the 3 sources with hyperlinks, so you can go click and read more. I could see something like that. I feel like there's going to be a lot of controversy and debate on how these citations take place and how the credit is given, but I think the dust hasn't settled on that yet.
And I also think there's a proprietary chatbot world coming too. So, right, maybe your website has a chat powered. I mean, lots of websites have chat now, but it's just not the same as a large language model powered chat. But I do think that there'll be some sort of walled garden for lots of different chat capabilities within, your own work.
Do you? I want to ask you a question. Yeah. Do you think, because that excites me more than most things in the world of LLMs and AI chat, the idea that I could build transcripts of all the podcasts that I've done, a couple hundred episodes, and have a search function where you could essentially ask the omniscient robot,
we can do it.
what do marketing leaders think about blah, blah, blah? And I'm curious about from your perspective, because that seems like it would be revolutionary for students in learning.
Well, let me tell you. So it's actually there. It's happening now. So I am the Universal Design for Learning statewide systems coach in Wisconsin. And so for the last 5 years, we've been creating a ton of content around implementation of UDL in schools and systems, districts at the state level. And so we've been creating content for 5 years through a grant that was funded. And we've created video content, we have podcast content, we have blog content. We are a content engine, essentially. And we have all of that stored in a tool called Searchy. We originally were in Searchy because it transcribed all of our videos and podcasts, and then it made all of them searchable based on the transcript and the overlay of the video. So we did that from an accessibility for an accessibility reason, and then we would embed them into our learning management system. But now Searchy has a chatbot tool that the guardrails on the response that the chat gives is all of our content in specific channels that we mark. So we do have a UDL chatbot that responds to questions about UDL from our content, and it provides the references, and they're all from our content. ChatGPT is still laying underneath of it so that the large language model is predictable, but it is pulling those predictions from our own content. And it is fascinating. I don't yet know, because it hasn't been built in the tool, the extent to which people are using that feature, but we do prominently display it everywhere that we can. And we are constantly anticipating what questions people are asking so that we can intentionally create the answer in a format that then can be pulled from the chatbot that we have. So to answer your question, it is revolutionary. It is extremely exciting because I don't want people learning about UDL and reading something about learning styles that has been debunked 10, 20 years ago now. I want them to have as up-to-date evidence-based content as they can. And I want to know the language in which they're getting it in, right? Like we very specifically choose to use the word learner over student. We very specifically talk about learning design versus lesson planning. And there's nuance in all of those pieces. And we're wanting people to pay attention to that. And so when our bot pulls from that, it highlights our language the way we would say it. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. See, that seems incredible to me. I've got so many ideas on that.
Yeah.
Because I could see the internal use case, right? For Omniscient, we have a ton of standard operating procedures, yes, how to work with clients, how to do admin stuff, right? And I guess this is going to your access and use of categories there. But you build up more and more content, and there's still use, but the access is harder because it's where do I find this specific document? So I could see that being incredibly useful.
Right, because the scope is so much broader. There's so much.
You've got a million documents. I don't even know where to find things in my Notion anymore. So it's you scale to if we 10x our employees, that's going to be a real problem. So finding and accessing the documents and the information could be huge. And then I could obviously see it from a content marketing standpoint too. And that's where some of this stuff interests me. Not from a general search perspective, but how does it get more specific? Yeah. How do you train it on your own brand voice and your own content to give answers that I would give about A/B testing, for instance, right? I think that's a really interesting use case.
And that's where it is. It's the use case. So having access to ChatGPT or any large language model isn't necessarily the change. The change is how people are now going to use content. And that's what we're needing to learn about as much as we can. And so earlier we talked about understanding. So whenever there's a change, it usually means that there are competing commitments. And so if the change isn't happening, it's usually because there's a competing commitment that is preventing full-scale change. What do you see being the competing commitments for either the people in your agency or the people you're serving through the agency that are requiring you to sort of teach people sort of the new perspective?
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I'm going to give you two. like I said before, I think about this a lot, like this whole dichotomy of leadership, dichotomous categories thing. So with AI, we could just use AI as sort of the example, but this is true of any technological shift or trend. There's sort of, what was the phrase? Competing
commitments.
Competing commitments. So it's like, how much do you rely on the underlying foundations and first principles that have provided success, and maybe historically, like they've been indicators of success for a long time? There's certain aspects of search, of content, of marketing that have been true for 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. And we don't know how much those are going to shift, but they've maintained homeostasis so far. And then there's the innovation. So like, how do you stay on top of the trends? And with AI, that's been a really hard thing for me specifically to solve, because I tend to flock towards interesting, shiny objects, especially around data and machine learning. So on some weeks, I'm like, we gotta go all in, you know? And then on other weeks, I'm talking to these enterprise companies who haven't figured out how to build links or do internal linking or like very basic SEO things. So then my mind goes, let's just do boring SEO. Like we're already driving results. So like there's this constant dichotomy between those two things. And the answer specifically for new trends and innovation for me is to do minimum viable experiments and to house those in a sort of test kitchen environment, because we've established a very good position and we've driven results for the clients that we serve. And I don't want to totally destroy that based on maybe it's like a big bet, right? And some agencies go straight in and it might pay off big for them, but it might totally fail. And I don't want to risk the business based on those assumptions. So what we'll do, and this is typically my function, is to try it out on my personal website, to try it out on the Omniscient blog, or to try it out on a experimentation focused client, somebody who's willing to take the experiment with us. And then we see, all right, what are the results? What are the constraints? What is this good for? Like, how can we actually use AI in this case? And can we incorporate it into our process in a way that's not going to break the system? So that's my model for that. And then a more general thing outside of any trends, there's always a dichotomy between process and systems and autonomy. And that's a real difficult one, especially for me. I'm a very autonomous person. And I think our agency has been built on the idea of custom strategy, especially on the strategy side. There's the editorial that relies a little bit more on process. But that's still one where it's like, all right, where do you enable autonomous decision making? And where do you say, hey, this is like the standardization. This is the way things are done. And it's done this way because we have quality standards. So that's really, you map out your existing workflows, your processes, you figure out areas that are constraints or bottlenecks in the system, and you try to work on those. It's an emerging iterative process, and we're constantly trying to find ways where we can like add automations to our process or innovate in this specific portion. And there's some portions where it's like, hey, look, here you have a goal, figure out how to do it. Like this is fully autonomous, but there's always sort of a competition between those two ends of the spectrum as well.
So I often coach people through the immunity to change process, which is where we identify what we're really committed to. And we identify sort of the technical pieces. What are we doing or not doing? And then we look at why we're doing or not doing. And essentially the why we're not is what results in competing commitments. We want to be innovative, but we know those first principles are really tried and true. And so in the coaching process, I often ask them to figure out what their assumptions are and then test those assumptions. And so you're doing that same thing in your test bed where you're running an experiment without throwing everything out. And the experiment then leads you to new assumptions and new commitments. And it allows you to be more free with the choices you make in going forward, because you have that test data to sort of challenge your assumptions. And that's where the real change happens. And I think if we, the hot takes that you read on LinkedIn about AI or SEO, they're going to be way on the other end. Those hot takes are not really going to be in a testing your assumptions kind of thing. They're going to be a throw your baby out with the bathwater kind of piece, because they believe that gets them the attention that they need in an attention economy. I think it's changing. I think attention will be less important as we sort of wade into, what's changing in SEO and traffic and in content just in general. While you're in content marketing, I'm in just content from a learning perspective. And it's the same. It always comes down to access plus use equals benefit. If there is no use, there is no benefit. And so while we're creating the content, we always have to be conscious of how people will use it, where they will use it, from a distribution, where they will even get it. That distribution is an access thing. Usage is something completely different. We've been solving for access for a long time. We're moving into solving for use, and that's interesting and exciting work. So I wish you the best of luck on it.
Thank you. It's fun. Big problems are fun to solve.
They are. Well, thank you so much for being here. Where would you love for people to connect with you in the interwebs?
The Long Game podcast, like you mentioned before, that's a good place to learn about what we're thinking about. We do interviews with marketing and growth leaders, but also just kitchen side episodes with the founding team of Omniscient, where we're talking about AI and all this cool stuff. You can also check out our website, beomniscient.com, and then I write at alexburkett.com if you want to check out my writing too.
I think everyone should check out your writing and follow along with the work that you do. The Kitchen Side podcasts are fantastic because you get an inside glimpse of all the things that the team is thinking about, and it's super, super fun. So thanks so much for being here on the Learning to Change podcast. Have a great day. And as I always say, don't get in trouble.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining me today on the Learning to Change podcast. I hope you found our discussion insightful and inspiring. As we continue to explore the power of learning and its impact on change, remember that it's not about pushing yourself or others to change, but about embracing the process of learning. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. If you're ready to take your learning journey to the next level or bring about a culture of learning in your organization, join us in our free Modern Learners community. We are here to help you navigate the challenges and celebrate the successes that come with embracing learning and change. Simply go to modernlearners.community and join us today. You'll find all the resources from today's show in there. Until next time, stay curious and remember, I'm not asking you to change, I'm asking you to learn. Learning to Change is produced by Yellow House Media. Our production coordinator is Lou Blaser. Marty Seafelt edits our episodes. Our production assistant is Emily Kilduff, and Sean McMullen is our executive producer. Learning to Change is recorded on the stolen land of the Sauk and Fox tribes, the Miami Nation, the Osati, Shakawi, Sioux, Ho-Chunk, and Kickapoo peoples.